get involved and help out. But if you really want to get involved, a good testimonial would be nice too, which means recording something that says that you are interested or how you benefited from it. That's also nice as well. If you do record a testimonial, you'll, I believe there's a nominal gift they said, and you'll be in an entry so that you can get a gift card. We'll be starting momentarily with our presentation, so if everybody would like to go ahead and have a seat. Jazakumullah khair for all attending. If we can get a just quick show of hands, how many people first time in this room for this conference? That means you haven't attended at all. So very, very few, and most people here are interested in family issues, and you're coming back. That's very good. Love the repeat customers, right? In any business, everybody loves repeat customers. I'm just using a business analogy. You're not customers, you're our guests and brothers and sisters joining us on these journey of life that we're going. Oh no, now I'm getting philosophical. Okay, before I get philosophical, let's get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa afdalu salatu wa atammu taslim ala khayr khalqillah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We always start with Bismillah. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'na wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna 'ilman ya rabbal alamin. We're starting today with I don't know, is this the last session? I didn't even look. Is there any more sessions, Dr. Samira?
I mean, we have a session on the main stage.
On the main stage, yes. So this is the one before last? I think so. And its topic is parenting our children through the marriage process. That's what we'll be talking to everybody about today, sharing with you some ideas, and hopefully you can take them back to your home city. There's one more topic that you will be able to see on the schedule that has to do with family issues that will be on the main stage. That's a little later. Let's get started on this one. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We have our two speakers who will be speaking today. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. Both of them have spoken here, and if you've already been here, you've heard the introduction about them many times. Dr. Samira Ahmad and Dr. Rafi. No doctor. But very specialized, let's just call him. Rafi Al-Mansour, as in a life doctor, not a literal doctor. Anyways, who will be speaking to us today about this important topic. And it's an important topic because a lot of us care about our children. And when we care about our children, we want them to get married, but many times the only thing we can really maybe reflect or think about or whatever is how we got married. Maybe if you're already married. And if you're not married, your parents are probably talking to you about marriage. And you're wondering, are they just carrying over everything that they learned from their one experience in their life, maybe two, in getting married, and are they imposing that on us today? That's what Dr. Samira and Brother Rafi will be talking to us about today. Jazakumullah khair for attending. If you have questions, you can see right on the app. You'll be able to click and ask your questions, and I will try my best as your moderator today. My name is Ratib, and I'm here, your moderator today. And I'll try to accumulate those questions. I see that there's already a question that's already set up. That's always interesting that there's a question before the speakers even start. There's always going to be a question that's about like specific cases. You're welcome to click the anonymous button on the bottom. That will keep you anonymous, because unless you really want people to know that you asked that question, if you're going to ask a real good question, don't click it, because then we get to all see, mashallah, good question, yes. But in general, if you're going to ask a question, don't give too many details in it. There's really no need for it. If you have a specific question, you're welcome to come up to the speakers and ask that specific question about your brother or sister or uncle or whoever who's having issues marrying off their daughter or son or whatever that issue is. You're welcome to do that. Other than that, the best questions are the kind that ask them to expound on something that they said that was interesting, or maybe what does that mean, or did they use an acronym they don't like. Those are also good questions too, because it really follows up with them on their specific discussion. I didn't ask which one of you would like to go first. Please go ahead and tell me if any particular person would like to. Dr. Samira, you're good with that?
We're just going to use the whole time together.
Excellent idea.
Let's keep things going, and then.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's really exciting to be here with all of you today. We've been 2 days, 3 days now, and this is the topic that really excites me the most. And one of the things that we started off with, we were initially doing these workshops for young people, and then they kept saying like, "Hey, you need something for our parents," because many different reasons. And then we kept hearing from parents like, "How do we help our kids do this?" And so this workshop or this talk is really for a kind of focus for you to help you understand what are the things you might be thinking, the changes that we've had in kind of society and kind of the Muslim community, and give you some tools to know how to navigate this with your kids. Rafi and myself are just going to be kind of talking as a conversation and interrupting each other, so it's not like one person kind of going off. So hopefully that will also be helpful in kind of sharing ideas and thoughts that with you, and it'll be more of a conversation, inshallah. So we can start off. One of the things we want to start off with, try to make it a little interactive. If you could, those of you who've been in this room know we like to use polls. We need to help people keep people awake. So if you want to go to the web or text 22333, again, text 22333 and enter Samira Ahmed 180. And I'm going to ask you some questions. Again, 22333 and enter Samira Ahmed 180. You guys all with me?
And the answers are anonymous, so your name won't show up.
Okay, can I move the page to ask the first question? Yes or no? Oh, wait a second. Okay, let's wait a second. And one of the things that we know is, you're sitting in a lecture for so many hours, so many days, you start tuning out, right? And so we want to make this interactive and interesting, get the feedback live, right? So text 22333 and Samir Ahmed 180. And so we're going to ask the first question of this tool, of this thing. What stage of the marriage search are you? Or your child, I guess in this case. And again, there's letters next to each area. Are you just curious and wondering about the process for you or your child? Interested but not ready? Actively looking? Tired of searching? Or some other? And it looks like we've got people in all stages, and that's good, alhamdulillah. We want people to be at different stages to kind of be thinking, for those who are not thinking about it, what to be thinking about, for those who are interested, giving them some direction, for those who are actively looking, giving you tools, and for those of you guys who are tired of searching, give you a little hope. So with that, we'll start off, inshallah. And we want to talk a little bit about marriage courtship and evolution. And I think one of the things that's really important for us to understand is looking at our own stories and thinking about our kids' stories. So when I think about, for my marriage, when I think about my parents' marriage, like, my parents never saw each other, they got married. So their relatives decided they were going to get married. My mom didn't even know my dad's name. Didn't even see what he looked like until his marriage day. Right? That was a different time period. When it came to my marriage, alhamdulillah, I've been married 25 years now. My mom had a heart attack when I said I want to talk to my husband, my fiance. Even before he was a fiance, I was like, I want to talk. I mean, if I'm going to be married to him for the rest of my life, I need to know a little something about him. We need to make sure we're all in agreement. And she was horrified. How could you be doing this? Why would you be doing this? Hey, look, she didn't say hey because she's Desi, obviously. She was like, what will people say? And all of that. And now we move to, and so you see this generational difference. And I'll let Rafi talk a little bit about his experience as well. So you see generation after generation, things are changing.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum everyone. So just to build on that, not married 25 years, well 25 minus the 5 for me personally, so just 2 years in. But in my process was a little bit different. For my parents, they actually were open to having a dialogue about marriage, which was pleasantly nice for me because I know that wasn't always the case for a lot of my friends, you know, and I noticed that there's a lot of differences in a lot of families in terms of how they treat the marriage process. But for me, I was able to have a conversation with my parents over the years, from post-college up until pretty much I got married. And I think this is really important because it allowed for us to talk about what it is that we both were hoping for and wanting and some of those differences. And sometimes we clashed, but we kind of tried to understand where the other one's coming from. And ultimately, it worked out, and now we can talk more about it, but yeah.
I think one of the things that which we really wanted to highlight was that the marriage courtship process and evolution is occurring. Right? And as I think about my daughter, who's probably going to kill me, but she's at that age too, and my cohort's daughters, you know, they're at that age, or sons, and the recognition that things are different now. What my parents used to do, you know, because of where we used to live, does not work anymore. You know, you can't just use the family networks. You can't just assume that they're going to find somebody in the MSA and get married. You can't just assume that things are just going to happen, right? There is some intentionality that needs to happen, and you need to start thinking as a parent about these issues as your child gets older. And so we want to talk a lot about that today, inshallah.
Maybe also help the kids find appropriate marriage matrimonial websites. Is that something that parents should look into, you think, or not?
It depends. It really depends. And I think one of the things that we really want to make sure you do is we want to give you all the tools, because each situation is going to be very different. And you cannot take a cookie cutter approach with these things. So we'll give you tools and guidelines and things to think about, and you're going to have to try these different things in this process.
Yeah, and so even for example, for me, I'll share a little bit more too. I found my wife, who was also sitting in the audience, online on an app, and so that's kind of what worked for us. And my parents were receptive to the idea, so it wasn't too much pushback, but I had to kind of educate them on what this is and have some level of kind of transparency and communication that we felt was appropriate. But we kind of had to negotiate those boundaries, right? How involved are they going to be as I'm on this platform, and how much should I be kind of sharing with them? But also, you know, where are the healthy boundaries that are good overall for this process? And again, like Samira was saying, there's no kind of cookie cutter approach to how you approach it. You have to kind of figure out where you are as parents and where your children are, and try to come to a common understanding. So on that point, I'll also share a little bit just to understand how the courtship process is evolving. It's helpful to understand how marriage itself has evolved over the years, right? For people in my generation or younger, when they think about not seeing their spouse at all and getting married, it's just unfathomable. Like, how could that even be possible? And so part of this is it's helpful to understand that the meaning of what marriage is or is supposed to be has changed over time. And even a lot of the research is in the West, so kind of take it with a grain of salt, but know that I think a lot of it applies in our Eastern cultures as well. But pre-1900s, the quality of life in the world was much lower than what we're used to today, right? The focus was on, ultimately everyone lived on a farm, and everyone focused on managing the farm and getting food on the table, right? It was food, shelter, and clothing were your priorities. So the ideas of even romantic connection and emotional connection, these were luxuries that people didn't really even think of. And so, marriage was symbolic of a structure of society that kept people alive and kept the society going. Then once you get into the 1900s, that's when the quality of life started going up with industrialization and urbanization, people moving to cities. People suddenly had more time on their hands and more kind of, less stress in their life. Also, one thing that changed is that husbands began to work in factories, right? So they would actually leave their home as opposed to everyone being at home taking care of the farm, the animals, and the crops, right? So whereas in a system where everyone's in one place working together, now suddenly the husband's leaving, he's working, and the wife is staying home, taking care of the home and the children. So this is actually the first time that you have very distinct spheres of labor between husbands and wives. And so in this stage of marriage, a lot of the focus was on fulfilling your roles, you know, being a good mother, a good father, a good husband, and a good wife. But suddenly, the idea of emotional connection started becoming more important. And spouses were seen as each other's companions. And so that's up until pretty much the 1900s to about the 1960s. Okay? Now, when you look at since then, a lot of things have changed in the last half century. And for example, you have dual income families now. And so with all of this, there's been a growing focus on individualization. And this idea that people look at marriage as being more individualized. So it's called now the individualized marriage. Right? First you had the institutional marriage, then the companionate marriage, and then the individualized marriage, where suddenly now people look at their marriage seeking emotional fulfillment, intellectual connection, physical fulfillment. So there's so many things that people seek that they expect from their marriages. Because this is kind of just the trend that things have evolved in. And so the reason I share this, and there could be more to say about this, but it's important because how we approach the courtship process is going to reflect how we look at marriage. And as parents, and really even for children, right, it's hard to understand how that's evolving and changing. And so for parents at least, it's good to recognize that things may be different and how your children look at marriage than how you might look at it. But that's not to say that the wisdoms that you carry and even the expectations that you have aren't important. There's a lot of good in that too, but there can be a bigger gap in between the two. And so having an ability to understand what's important to both your children and for them to understand what's important to you is important in all of this.
In addition, when we talk about courtship, recognizing that networks have changed, the methods of getting married and finding a spouse has changed, and also the opportunities. Beforehand, you may live in the same city and that would be your source of getting married. Now, we have online opportunities, we have conventions, you have gatherings, and so many different ways to get married. And so one of the things that people were really struggling with is, well, what does this courtship process look like now for us Muslims in America? What are the processes? What are the things that we should consider? All of that. And so one of the things to realize is, for those of you who are not familiar with the FYI, the way we do work is we identify what the issues are. And when we know what the issues are, then we do the research to address those issues. And as we understand what are the nuances going on, what are the things that are needed, what are the issues that are concerning our community, we then work towards solutions. What solutions are needed to help our community tackle this issue. And as we develop those solutions, as we understand what those solutions are, we see that we need to develop resources to address that issue. And as we do that, then we need to get that out to you so that you can actually use. And as you're using it, we need your feedback. Is this working? Is it not working? What do you like? What do you not like? And that's why, as Rabta mentioned earlier, we need your feedback. And if you're willing to give your feedback today, that would be wonderful. We'd really appreciate it. But when you give us your feedback, we take that and go back and improve all the different resources that we provide. So with that, one of the areas of work that Rafi has been doing is looking at courtship amongst Muslims.
Yeah, so I was fortunate to be able to do a study looking at how courtship for Muslims in America is evolving. And I want to just kind of give some preface to what kind of inspired this study. And so as I learned more about courtship and how it evolved in America for non-Muslims, I kind of had this curiosity of how is it going to change for us Muslims that have chosen to settle here. Right? We have our values, we have our deen, we have even the cultural values that can be good, but we're in a society that doesn't have or share many of those same traits. And so I think it's helpful to explore how it changed for non-Muslim Americans, just in the general society, so we can understand, okay, what are the potential trends that can come up for us as a community. And so I'm just going to start there first. So when you look at how people got married in America, even going back to the colonial times when people first settled here, unlike a lot of Western Europe, arranged marriages were never actually a big thing in America. You had it in some kind of, higher up societies in Europe, but in America, courtship was actually always the kind of foundation of how the marriage was done. And you think about this, when people settled in America, right, it's a whole new country, and you have to create your civilization. So you need all hands on deck, men and women. And so there was, from the very beginning of society in this country, there's a lot of engaging and working to make society work. And so it allowed for a lot of connection between men and women, but always in kind of like a chaperoned way. And so actually for the first 200 years of American society was rooted in courtship, where there was some interaction between genders, but it was public and parents were always involved in the process. Then when you got to the 1900s, again, in this era of companionate marriage, that's when suddenly, as the quality of life started going up, children for the first time didn't have to work on the farms. It was in the 1900s was the first time that the majority of children actually went to high school. Prior to that, middle school is where the majority of children would stop their education. And so then this allowed for a lot more kind of youth subculture, and essentially this is when dating emerged. This idea that people kind of date and within the rules of what the children make, not what the parents make in their kind of supervision. And then as this goes on, it goes up until pretty much, without getting into all the details, nowadays we have more non-committal relationships, where, for example, people hooking up or not really being committed to each other at the start of the relationship. And so there's two trends that changed as you went from courtship to dating to what, even non-committal forms today. So one of those is that the intention for marriage became less and less important at the start of a marriage, right? At the start of a relationship. So when you meet someone, you're not thinking about marriage as much, right? You're maybe just thinking about dating or having a good time or anything else. And the second variable that kind of changed over time is that parents had less and less involvement in the process. It became more centered around the person that's in the relationship and less about the parents in that course. And so I did this study, and I sent out this survey looking into this through a platform called MAS-ICNA. Some of you may have heard of it. So at the time, they had about 250,000 members. Now I think they're probably around 5 million or so. They're really large. So we had about 1,100 survey responses, and these are some of the findings that we found. So focusing just on the parental involvement, actually even just parental approval, the chart on the left asks the question, my parents' approval of my choice of marriage partner is important to me. And about 20% said absolutely, and another 35% said strongly. So if you're looking at absolutely and strongly, it's a little bit over half of people said that their parents' approval is really important. Which is still pretty significant. I mean, you can make of it what you will, right? It's not 100% absolutely, but it's there. And at least, when you factor in moderately, pretty much a substantial majority of people really care that their parents are okay with the person they choose to marry. The ironic part about this is when you look at the question on the right, it says, I feel comfortable talking to my parents about my romantic interests. And only about 20% say absolutely or strongly. Which means that there's kind of this gap of where children want their parents' approval, but they're not actually that comfortable talking to them about it. And I think this kind of introduces the first kind of ironic piece of this. I don't know if it's fun.
And while we're talking about that, if you want to send a text, just let us know what do you think are the causes that our children experience discomfort talking about marriage, right? Because one of the things that happens is, think about how we're socializing our kids, right? We've told them, since they're a kid, middle school, high school, don't talk to the opposite gender, don't look, don't interact, don't whatever. And then all of a sudden, okay, get married, find someone. And they're like, what do you mean? And so we've never had those conversations, right? And so, again, how do we talk to our kids? It feels awkward for us, and it feels awkward for our kids. Sometimes there's just a connection, and we don't know how to talk. What are the things to talk? What are the priorities? And we get nervous, and not having the tools, and not really knowing the support system. And these are things to really important, like how do you have those conversations? How do you go through that pathway of finding someone, especially if you're a convert, and you don't necessarily have that support system, right? Different expectations. You're thinking, well, this is how I got married, so why don't you get married this way? And all of these issues are coming up, And then you're not really sure, like, what is my child doing? If I open the door, what will happen? You know, and what will they do? Do they have the tools and skills? So all of these kind of questions that make us uncomfortable and our kids uncomfortable, right? And then really not sure about dating websites and are they good or not, right? And these are the kind of things that make us uncomfortable with the topic, as well as the discomfort that our kids have because we don't know how to talk about these things, right? And so one of the things we really want to think about is also what are the parenting roles in courtship?
Yeah. And so what this study, and just to kind of summarize it in short, I think shows is that the whole model of how Muslims in America are going about getting married is in transition. And particularly when you look at this chart here on the bottom right corner, it says, I mostly rely on my parents to find me a suitable marriage partner. A full 75% said not at all or slightly. Now, the reason why this is so significant is that there was a study done exactly 25 years before this one by Dr. Ilyas Begunis, where he looked at similar questions in the American and Canadian Muslim communities. And in that survey, 77% said that they mostly rely on their parents to find their spouse. So in just a matter of 2.5 decades, it's not very long, the statistic has flipped on its head. From relying on parents to children not really looking to their parents to find their spouse. And so that can be really hard, I think, for parents and for children in navigating this.
And so imagine this. They're working on their own. We're not having conversations with our kids. And we have Hollywood telling us this is what marriage looks like and this is what the courtship process should look. And so there's a lot of confusion for our kids. And so one of the things that we as parents need to really recognize is while our kids want us involved, there's a way of involvement. And they're also recognizing that maybe my parents don't necessarily know what I'm looking for, right? And so what we really want to start thinking about are the solutions. How do we handle this reality, right? And so we talked about, the study found that they want their parents involved, but they don't know how to talk about it. So it's really important that we talk to our kids about this area, about this topic. Talk about their interests, what they're looking for, what are the values you suggest. Think, where are they going to look? If they're not thinking about it, to start thinking about it, once they get a certain age where marriage is something on the horizon, right? Encourage your kids, because as they're sharing, you can help provide them wisdom, experiences, because life experience is very different than what Hollywood tells you, right? Really focusing on akhlaq, really making sure that they're doing the background checks, really looking for people and places that make sense, and really helping your child know that, look, when you're going through this process, I can be there with you, kind of evaluating this process. And as you're, depending on where your stage is, if you're just starting on the process, having those conversations are really, really helpful. If you've been on this journey for a few years, and it's been a difficult journey, and particularly for young females, sometimes kind of harping on the topic over and over and over again really starts to impact their self-esteem. As if that is the only aspect to their being. And if they're not married, they must be a failure. So that's one thing parents need to be really careful about is, as you're going through the process, do not make their self-worth be attached to the marital status. Have the conversations. Have kind of the discussions of what the values are, what you suggest would be important, what are the things to consider, all of those conversations. But don't make their total self be related to that topic.
Yeah, and I think part of this also comes from just the anxieties that come up, both for the children in the process and for the parents. And so, how you manage that anxiety, and particularly when I think parents oftentimes can feel so helpless in the process, right? They don't have the networks that maybe for their parents had or your parents had, because society isn't as collectivistic as it was back then. And so it's hard, right? You feel helpless, you don't know what to do, and it can come out, right, when you're in those interactions with your children.
Brother Rafi, you mentioned real quick that there's a lot of challenges in trying to decide when to help children to get married. One of the questions that was asked is regarding helping your children get married before college, while they're in college, after college. Question asks, are there any statistics on success of marriage if a couple gets married before or after completing college? Are there any?
Specific to the Muslim community? No.
In the, I believe in the 1100 response that you got, did it say anything about college? That's what the questioner was asking. So maybe a future survey would also incorporate this interesting question?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to realize that everybody's different. Some people, getting married earlier is better. Some people it's later, but recognize with each one, there's positives and negatives. And you have to look at the maturity of the individuals involved and the support systems there. So again, no cookie cutter approach, but there are pros and cons for both. If you're getting married younger, you grow together, but you may not be have a clarity on your values, beliefs, and direction. So that's a downfall. And so you do see greater divorce rates at that age. But at the same time, if you wait long and you get kind of rigid in your thinking and direction, it makes it harder. So I mean, again, there's no one way or the other. You really need to look at the situation. And my best advice would be when you're right now, before they're actually ready to get married, to really kind of get them to start working on themselves. Knowing their strengths, the areas of growth, if they have issues, addressing those issues, what's underlying, all of that stuff. And then when they're ready to get married, to then really start going through that process. And we'll talk about that later on, inshallah. But I think when we think about what are the difficult topics to discuss, right? Status, different kind of roles and responsibilities, money, financials, parents, these are all different issues that we're struggling with. And to realize that if there's issues, let's start thinking about those topics sooner rather than later so that you can have those conversations with your kids.
And someone is asking about the criteria that parents have for marrying off their kids. Everybody likes to think that their son and daughter is the prince and princess and nobody's good enough for them. Is that also a challenge, and is that also an undefined line, or is there a clear line?
Yeah, of course, I think that's a very common, probably, struggle for many, many people. I could even share personally within my process. One thing that kind of, between my parents and myself, my parents always argued that I had too low standards. I thought that I saw the good in people. I didn't think, I thought my standards were fine. But they always had what to me felt like too many expectations in some ways. And so over time, we had to kind of really negotiate about, okay, what's really important here and what's not. But one thing that I think is important, maybe to kind of get to the bottom of between parents and children, is if you had to just pick a couple of deal breakers, right? If you could only come down, right? We all have our ideals of what we would love to have. By the end of the day, if there's just some things that no matter what, it's not about right or wrong, but just in my heart, I can't budge on this. What would those things be, right? And it's okay as parents to have your own dreams and your own vision of what your child's marriage and family is going to look like. Because you're going to be in-laws, you're going to be involved in this process too, and I think children should also hold a respect for that. But there should be a letting go to some extent, right? You shouldn't make it too difficult for them. And so I know for my parents, one of the things that came up a lot was that, I'm personally, I'm Bengali, and they really wanted a Bengali daughter-in-law. And I saw the value in it, right? I saw that, okay, we have a big family, we speak in Bangla at home a lot, I can see how this could be really beneficial. But over time, factoring all the other kind of, challenges, I had to kind of turn down many people along the way, and it was really hard on me or frustrating. And so at some point I told my parents, okay, look, we've talked about this several times, I'm gonna give this one more year, right? If I turn X years old and I still haven't found the, Bengali daughter-in-law of your dreams, then I'm gonna open up the pool and I'm not gonna stick to this anymore. So I gave them some time, is what I did. And they understood it. And they didn't fight it, they didn't push back against it, they didn't want to hear it, but they knew that it was fair. Fortunately, in that year, I did find the daughter-in-law of their dreams. So it kind of worked out for both of us. But
I think that highlights the importance of communication again. That you need to have that ongoing conversation with your child. You have your dreams and expectations, but one, why? What's underneath them? Communicate that. And also ask yourself, are these realistic expectations? Again, when you think about my conversations with my parents, you know, they wanted someone from the same city, from the same culture. And I'm like, that's great, but to me, the value of I need someone who is going to be sonically active, who has values and ideas that I have, and are willing to kind of serve the community, because that's not a lifestyle everybody can do, right? And so there was a lot of going back and forth. And you know, I married international. I went to Pakistan to get married. I didn't go to Pakistan to get married, but my husband is originally from Pakistan. But that was considered international for us, right, for my family, because we're originally from India. And the city's in Hyderabad, so you don't marry outside of that city. But what they realized and valued, because there was that conversation back and forth, I knew myself that I would never be happy with somebody who's not going to be active. I was able to communicate and push for that in that conversation. And alhamdulillah, my husband is active in everything that I wanted him to be. Alhamdulillah, Allah blessed us with marriage. But that was hard for my parents. But part of that kind of confidence that I had is the fact that I went through this process of self-reflection. What is it that I need to thrive? That's a conversation you really want your kids to think about. What do they need to be whole, to grow, to be happy? Because not every good Muslim boy or girl is going to be good for your son or daughter. They have to do that work before there's somebody in the picture. And as they start understanding themselves and their knowledge about who they are and what they need, then they'll be able to kind of figure out what are my wants. Yeah, I would like some tall, dark, and handsome, whatever. But is that as important as someone with good akhlaq, good manners, who I'm going to be living with for the rest of my life? Does that person value family? I come from a very large extended family, mashallah, about 600. We can take over this town, no problem. And that husband has to know and deal with that family, because it's very much part of me. And so these are the little things that you want to go through and think about what matters to you and your child and your family, and what helps support you and grow. And there are things that your child may have that they need to work on, and they need to develop to be the best spouse they can be. This is your chance to guide them in that process. Again, when I was younger, I was not assertive. I was not communicative. I had difficulty expressing my feelings and needs. But that was something that I worked on before marriage to say, okay, when I get married, I cannot repeat those issues. I need to work harder. And I had to push myself in the first few years. But I was able to do that because I had gone through that skills development. I had recognized communication was an issue. It still is an issue, I'm not perfect. But I learned to express my needs more. And that's what you want your kids to do, to figure out, okay, where do I need to work on? Do I need to work on my anxiety? Do I need to work on being not as stressed? Do I need to work on communicating more effectively? Do I have the emotional vocabulary to explain different topics to my spouse, right? All of those things you want to encourage them to work on before they have somebody in the picture. And if they have unresolved issues, to address them. Many of us have trauma, experiences, issues with self-esteem, all of these things. Deal with it before you're in a relationship.
And is divorce one of those issues?
Yeah.
You had previous parents who were divorced. They're trying to help you get married, but they don't live together. Each one is trying to help from a different angle. One of the questions asked, how do I avoid ending up like my parents who were divorced?
Yeah. And going through this process and being very intentional and going through pre-marriage education, that's going to decrease the likelihood of your divorce. 9 out of 10 individuals who've gone through pre-marriage education, not after the invitations have been sent, but when you're in the beginning of the process, going through this process of really thinking, self-reflection, understanding who I am, what do I need, what are the things that I need to work on, all of that, if you've gone through that process, you're more likely to be set up for success. And we'll talk a lot about that a little bit more. But again, even this topic of what are the common fights that couples have, right? Have those conversations. Understand your values. What are your financial values? How does that play out in how you're spending? All of those things become conflicts.
Two different questions, both about the same topic, which is the line. Where's the line about what's Islamic and not Islamic in courting? Maybe apply to oneself, but as well to their kids. They see their kids texting other boy or girl, or brother or sister, whatever, and they wonder, is that halal or not? Now, the line, is that because there's no clear-cut sharia about what's halal and haram? Or is it because it's still in the evolution, as Brother Rafi is saying? Which one is it?
Can we get to that in a little bit?
Yes, we can. We have about 5 minutes left. Go.
How many minutes do we have?
Well, it's 4:12. Yeah,
Oh, we don't have much time.
not much, yes.
So kind of going, as he was talking about a little bit earlier about marriage preparation, it's really important, like I said, 9 out of 10 couples who go through pre-marriage education are less likely to divorce, right? And to recognize that marriage preparation matters, because what you're doing is you're equipping your children with the skills needed to be successful in a marriage. You're helping them understand, just like you study at the university to do well and get a job, you need to study and work on a marriage. A lot of times people are like, well, my parents never did it, why do I have to do it? Question I have, are they happy? Right? And if they're not happy, or if they are happy, did they have positive mentors? Did they have, support systems? Like, what did they have to be happy? And for those of them who were not happy, recognize, that you don't want to be in the same situation. And if, the Prophet ﷺ asked us or encouraged us to seek knowledge, wherever it may be. And if we have this knowledge, why not use it, right? And so prevention is the biggest key. Now, before marriage, encourage them to read books, encourage them to do all the stuff that we just talked about. All of that's going to be theoretical until they get married. And the reality will set in. But what you've done is you provided them a narrative, topics, issues, all of that, so that when they encounter those troubles, they know where to go back to and get the information, and we read that information, right? And so one of the things that we do have is we have a pre-marriage workshop that we do before people are really looking for a particular person in mind. And that helps walk young people through that process of what that looks like, and how to look for it, and what are the kind of the red flags, what are the issues, the red lines, all of those things that goes through that. So one of the things I do want to ask is, how have you or your children searched in this process? If you want to add that, then you can kind of also add some additional comment.
Yeah, and let's see, maybe just as another point to bring up too, as parents too, I think there is a certain wisdom that parents bring in the process, and particularly in a lot of in traditional societies, Eastern, even non-Muslim Eastern societies, there's a lot of emphasis put on family compatibility, right? They look at the family and they see, how does this family connect to ours? And sometimes I think people in my generation can be a little bit quick to write off like some of those kind of elements. But I think when you're getting married, you're creating a new family culture together. And it comes from the culture of your own family, not necessarily what country my parents are from, but what you were used to, the rules of how things are done, and the expectations of how to navigate. And so what I found is that when there is a similarity in the families, and the families get along, that oftentimes says that for the children, that they'll because they've grown up in a similar kind of setting, that it might be easier for them to navigate without having to kind of negotiate everything when it comes to that.
So when you're searching for your child, right? My recommendation would be to start early. Keep an eye out, right? Because to find a good match in terms of your child, as well as your family, your values, your direction, it takes time, right? And to encourage involvement, to encourage your children to be involved in Muslim settings and places where they're more likely to find people who share the same values and thoughts. Because when you're working with somebody, you get to see how responsible they are, how do they follow through, how do they deal with stress, how do they deal with anger, all of these things. Your children get a chance to see how other people are reacting and interacting, And that's a good kind of indicator of what they might look like in a marriage, right? And so if you see someone who is never responsible, never responsive, never does anything they're expected to do, the work is half quality, not the greatest quality, probably doing that in other areas of life as well, right? So it doesn't matter, avoid. So you want to make sure that you are teaching your kids how to look at these things. You also want to use your own network, your family, your friends, your relatives. Ask as many people to just keep an eye out. There's no shame in that. Like, you are looking for who would be a good fit for your family, for your child, to make sure that they're thriving in their relationship. You're looking for an individual who is going to be a role model for your grandkids. Like, you need to be thinking about that in that way. And so really making sure to tell people, like, hey, keep an eye out for my son, keep an eye out for my daughter. They may be doing it on themselves. And if they're doing, that's fine. But you also support them in that process. They may choose to be online. Go look online. And if that's the case, having those conversations, okay, if you're going to look online, these are the things to be careful about. These are the things to watch out for. These are this is the other of doing things online. Like, really having those conversations, because there's a lot of confusion, right? There's a lot of confusion. People are like, well, if I'm looking for the purpose of marriage, I can do this, I can do that. No. Like, there are clear guidelines in Islam about gender interaction. And that gender interaction, those rules are to the nikah day, right? There is no reason for you to be alone. There is no reason you can be in public settings and have conversations. Great. One of the things you could do is especially because you want to avoid emotional attachment at the beginning. Once you get, the kitab and all that, then fine. And you got it, then you're married. But you want to make sure that you and your child are analytical in the initial stages of this process, to make sure you're evaluating, is this person a good fit for your child and for your family, right? And be intentional in whatever you do to try to find help support your child and your spouse. And so, for example, if your child decides to do things online, a lot of what Rafi was talking about having those conversations of what makes sense, what are the things to avoid. I think those are the things that you'd want to be doing.
We have a question regarding starting early. What if the question asks, the person's doing the right thing, the parent, they're trying to start early, but the children, they're just not receptive. They don't want to hear anything about marriage or anything. Now, I assume they want to get married someday, they just don't want to hear from the parent. So the questioner did not ask this, I'm throwing it in. Maybe underhandedly, like, if my son does something very nice, I'll say, your wife's gonna be so lucky from the nice treatment. Or if my daughter cooks something good, I'm gonna say, oh, your husband's gonna love this when you cook it. They don't wanna hear that. Are the parents starting too early? Or do we have arrogant kids that are not appreciative because us parents are working anyway? Go ahead.
No, I think part of it is also, is it embarrassment? Is it awkwardness? Is it I'm not ready emotionally to get married? Because many of our kids are not early on. And that's fine. I'll tell people, like, that's fine. You don't have to be ready. What you have to be doing is working on yourself, doing the self-work to make sure whenever you decide you're ready to get married, you're in a good place. You know who you are. Because the thing is, when you have that self-understanding, when it's easier to look at who's going to be a good fit or not, as opposed to confusion. Like, oh, he seems like a nice guy, or she seems like a nice girl, she's really pretty, or she's like, all that. What's going to matter 10, 20 years from now? Like, are the values matching up or not? If you have that clarity, and I'll tell you, I am very strange. I think most people know that, who know me personally. When I was going through this process, I actually had a sheet. And I said, okay, these are my values, this is what I need. If somebody meets, 90% of these things, I'll consider them. And so people would come, I'm like, oh, the things that matter to me doesn't matter. They're great people. They're great human people. So I didn't have to go through the whole emotional kind of roller coaster that most people did. I was like, okay, these are the things, he matches, okay, we can get married. Obviously, he went through hell trying to get married because I'm like, hey, he studied, did you do this, did you do that? But what that helped, it helped him understand my values and beliefs. I understand his values and beliefs, and we're much more compatible than if I was just kind of an emotional drama roller coaster.
Yeah, and just to add, if your children are pushing back every time you bring up the topic of marriage, it probably doesn't help to keep bringing it up directly or indirectly. It's probably a little more fruitful to just ask them, okay, well, when do you think you would be ready? When would be a good time, or what do you think is kind of, makes you feel like this isn't the right time for marriage?
Oh no, whatever. What's with kids these days? How about the opposite end of the spectrum, if we can wrap up with that? Super obedient kid. They won't tell you what's on their list. Whatever you say, they say, how them. And they're ready to get married, and you're thinking, are you going to marry the first one you met with no criteria or anything? Is that a problem? Or is that a super obedient child who's going to have a successful life because they listen to their parents for a change?
I would highly encourage them to get to know themselves more and understand, because if they're like Khaled or whatever you say, what's going to happen when they get married? Right? So that tells you that they're still developing their sense of identity and who they are. And you want to make sure that they have a sense of who they are, a sense of what they bring to the relationship, have decision-making abilities. You want them to be in a good place when they enter a relationship. And so when you do that, that tells you that there needs to be more development for that individual, for your child, so that when they enter the relationship, they're entering as partners, right? Because what's going to happen is they'll enter a relationship, and whatever you say, I'll do. 10 years later, you're going to have a volcanic eruption, where they've been stuffing, and then boom, all these issues are going to come up, and the other spouse will be like, what do you mean? You've always been okay. You've always been saying this is okay. No, this person has been stuffing because they didn't know what to do. So really helping to develop them. And so one of the things I would also like to highlight is the number of different resources we do have available for you as parents, as well as your children. So if you look up here, we have a number of different research studies that we've done looking at courtship amongst Muslims. And Rafi highlighted one of his studies. But we also have infographics. Again, these are infographics you can have conversations with your kids about in the community about the importance of pre-marriage education. And then we also have videos and toolkits. And in that toolkit, it is pages of resources that you and your child can go through. You can do it together, you can do it independently. As a parent, you want to know, what can you do to be more supportive? And having those conversations. So in terms of workshops, we have a workshop for young people before they get married. We have a workshop for couples after they get married. And we have a workshop for parents that goes into much more detail than what we did today about how to better support your kids. And then importantly, when your child is talking to somebody and they're serious, before the announcement is made that they're engaged, please do pre-marriage education, and we have a program called Prepare to Pair that really, it's a course, it's an online course that they can do, even if they're in different studies. They fill out an inventory. The inventory compares the two couples, looking at their areas that they need to work on and discuss. You can meet with a coach who's also a therapist. Rafi is one of them, I'm one of them, we have a couple other people. And they go through saying, these are the things you need to be aware of. These are the conversations that you need to have to make sure that you set your marriage up for success. And then there are different course topics that we talk about: compatibility, family and relationship. You want them to go through it. There are quizzes, there's discussion points that the couple can have, and go through all of that. And in that process, again, you're setting yourself up for success because you're giving your kids the tools to be successful in their relationship. Right?
One of the last questions is about resources. You mentioned that there are plenty of resources, and somebody's asking, is there a resource where they can learn about what's halal and haram in the brother-sister interaction?
Yes.
Where can they go for that?
It's in the toolkit. But simply being said, right? PPL, think of that. Public. All the conversation needs to be public. Conversation cannot be, you want to keep it to the point. Right?
Wait, you said PPL. Can you say real quick? PPL. What does it stand? Public, purposeful,
And limited.
and limited. Go ahead, you were going to
Thank
say.
you, because I was forgetting it. PPL, so public, what was the other one again? Purposeful Unlimited, sorry. It's something that our kids have all learned in MINA, and so I remember it, but I'm like, oh, what was it again? But the idea was, public, you don't want to have one-on-one private conversations because things can happen, right? And for those of you who do not know, there is a lot of premarital sexual activities, there's sexual assault, all of this stuff happens within our community. Sometimes our kids are naive, and they don't think it could happen to them. And there are rules Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that says a man and a woman who are not married cannot, and not mahram, cannot be alone together. We need to help our kids understand that even in the context of engagement, they need to abide by it, right? Purposeful, again, before beginning stages, before somebody's married, you want to make sure the conversation is purposeful and you don't stay go off track, because you never know when the marriage can break. I have seen marriages break on the 11th hour. And so it decreases the emotional attachment, that kind of roller coaster, all of that stuff that happens. And really having those conversations with your kids that, hey, you need to make sure of these things when you're even in this process. So I hope that helps.
It does. Jazakallah khair. We're over time, so jazakumullah khair everybody for staying. And if we can thank our two lecturers here. QR code is on up the screen if you want to see any of those tools. Printouts of those kits are outside, but we recommend you go on the website and see what resources they have so you can help your children get married successfully, Islamically, and increase their chances of having a happy marriage, which is what all of us would like, and decrease the chance of like hardships and divorce and stuff like that for yourself, if your parents are helping you get married, or for your children. Jazakumullah khair. As we mentioned real quickly, we're welcoming testimonials. If you'd like to record something, there is a gift card that they're giving out for that they'll be having a drawing for those. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us. Wassalamu alaikum.